Very honored to have a chance to speak with all of you. As Raj just pointed out, my background is in tech, and my time in medicine has really only been during the last 2 years, where I've had a very, very steep learning curve of how long and how hard it takes to drive change in medicine. This morning's presentation is going to be about 10% about AliveCor and about 90% about what we think the future of medicine will be, and hopefully I'll give you some examples that have us very excited about the role of AI. Now, why talk about artificial intelligence? Well, when I was a kid and I met Bill Gates and decided to leave George Washington University and go and work at Microsoft, my mom was very upset. I'm Indian, and as most of you know, if you're Indian, if you don't get your PhD, you're pretty much a loser. And my mom looked at me and said, "What are you doing? I've never heard of Microsoft." And I told her, "Mom, I think it's going to be okay." And the reason I decided to take that bet at a young age was I believed we were witnessing a paradigm shift. I believed the world was about to change, and that one day everyone would have a computer in the home, largely driven because of the adoption of graphical user interfaces. And that was Bill's vision too. You guys might remember our tagline. It was so controversial. It was a PC in every desktop and in every home. It seemed almost unbelievable. I was lucky enough to join that team and be part of that paradigm shift, but I saw many more in my career. Years later, I remember the first time I started using the internet, and the first demo I did for my wife. I took a file on a server in Seattle, and I dragged and dropped it to another server in Paris. And I excitedly told my wife, "Do you understand what just happened?" She continued to think I was a geek. But of course, the next week I presented at a conference with 2,000 people. I still have the video. And I asked the question, how many of you have heard of the internet? Can you imagine asking that question today? Yet the internet wave, that paradigm shift, was bigger than the wave of the personal computer and GUI. Subsequently, when I ran the mobile team, I asked Larry, who's the founder of Google, "Larry, why do you want me to run engineering and product for the mobile team? I'm the newest VP at Google." And he said, "Vic, nobody wants it. Mobile's been a disaster for years." And so I worked with Steve Jobs, built the first Google apps on the iPhone, Google Maps, YouTube search, and of course really believed in the future of mobile. And mobile revolution turned out to be as big as the internet. How many of you don't have a smartphone in your hand? And yet what I'm telling you is that the revolution caused by artificial intelligence, in my belief, will be bigger and more impactful on society than what happened with mobile, the internet, and personal computers. It is the largest transformative event that I will probably witness in my lifetime. And I tell this to my children, and I hope that some of the examples that we show you today in the realm of cardiology will at least start giving you glimpses of how we think deep neural networks and unsupervised learning will play in cardiology. Okay? So with that broad background, let me dive in for just a few minutes about AliveCor. How many of you have never used the AliveCor product? Wow. Let me ask the other question. How many of you have used the AliveCor product? Wow. Okay, I'm going to go through this super fast. You know what our device looks like. It's an amazing little device. You hold your hands on it for 30 seconds. It'll do an ECG. And then most importantly, because as most consumers cannot read the squiggly lines, they don't know what a PQRST complex is, it'll give you an FDA-cleared algorithm which will tell you if you're in normal sinus rhythm or if you're in possible AFib. The company spent about 4 years and $40 million before they got FDA approval. And the FDA approval is the 510Ks are on the device and each one of the algorithms. So, this is a quick little video. You can hold it. It'll do your ECG. We recently launched blood pressure, activity, weight integration as well if you have an Omron blood pressure cuff. And most importantly, we just launched Cardia Pro. And Cardia Pro is a platform not for consumers. Cardia Pro is for the physician, as you can see here on the screen. And I'm going to pause it here once the video gets to a certain point. You probably can't see it here. Some of you can see it on the screens here, but this really allows a physician to have an unprecedented view. Typically, a doctor sees 1 or 2 ECGs a year from their patients. Our customers do about 20 a month. And so when that patient comes in, that doctor can see, in this case, Barbara, all the ECGs Barbara's done since the last visit. Which ones are AFib, which ones are normal, what's happened to her BMI, her activity, her blood pressure. This is an unprecedented view that the doctor has. Patient engagement goes through the roof. It's fantastic, and we're seeing really broad adoption of that platform. We can talk to you about that later. What drew me to join AliveCor was really stories like this. This gentleman wrote us an email. He said, my wife got your device because her cardiologist told her to get it. She was in the hospital for a few days with bad AFib, but she has it with her at all times, and she loves it. He said, I'm 69 years old, I'm fit, never had a medical problem in my life. I'm in Palm Springs this past weekend, playing golf. I get a bad case of what I think is indigestion. Indigestion won't go away. So I asked my wife, can I borrow your device? He does a quick check, it's abnormal. He does it again, it's abnormal. He calls 911, they rush him into the hospital. He's having full MI, a widowmaker, he says. And he said, they did emergency surgery, I have no permanent heart damage. Your device may have saved my wife's life, and now it may have saved mine. We get these every Monday, right? So it's a great story. But for those of you who've known about AliveCor, you know that patients have always felt that way. I asked Greg at UCSF, I said, what do you think of our device? He said, it's great for patients, not so great for me. I said, why? Why don't you like it? He said, well, Vic, think about what it's like to be a cardiologist or an EP. Saturday night, 11 o'clock at night, you get an email from L1972@yahoo.com. How am I supposed to know that's my patient Lucy? And what am I supposed to do with that rhythm strip? Am I liable? Do I have to act? And so it's a great product for patients, but PDFing, emailing cardiologist rhythm strips may not be great for them. And so with Cardia Pro, we solve all those issues. We take care of the liability, we take care of management, integration into the ER, and finally make this a product where we hear comments like this from doctors. This is Dr. Carlsberg. I think many of you know Dr. Carlsberg. He's quite a character, a lot of fun. But he called it a paradigm shift in the management of arrhythmias because it makes it easier for the doctor to manage a large patient population who use this device. Okay, that's it. We're not talking about AliveCor anymore. Now let's shift and talk about the role of AI. Let me begin with a story. My father, excellent health. He did have a heart attack when I was younger, when I was 12. But generally in good health. And we have a home in Carmel, as I suspect everyone in this room knows. Carmel, the beach to the restaurants is up a very steep hill, about 5 blocks you have to walk. And he would walk from the beach up to the restaurant, no problem, often leading the pack. The second month, he was middle of the pack. By the third month, he couldn't make it up the hill. And he said, hey, why don't you guys go ahead? I'll catch up with you. I'm out of breath. And as good children, what do you think we did? We said, Dad, you got to go see your cardiologist right away. And when we got back to Los Gatos, he did. I came home from Google one day. He happened to be over my house. I said, Dad, what did you had your appointment today. What did the doctor say? And he said, he did a stress test. He did an ECG. He said, I was fine. Go home, Paul. And of course, I was livid. Why was I livid? Because as his son, I could see the degradation of his health. Yet the doctor only had 1 or 2 data points and couldn't see what we saw. So we asked ourselves, what if you could do something to assist the doctor? What if you could build an artificial intelligence agent that modeled your heart and constantly guarded your heart? We said, why not try it? Why not build it? And so we did exactly that. We built a 4-layer convolutional network, not the recurrent neural networks that you use for things like speech training, but a convolutional network that works really well on ECG data. And we said, let's see if we can train it and just tease out one thing, identity. Really, because identity is not regulated by the FDA, in case you guys are wondering, why do we choose identity? But we asked it, if I show you an ECG, can you tell me that this is Paul's ECG? And once we built the network and we trained it, we got extraordinary results. Now, for those of you that can't see this chart, it's 2 years of data. Each dot represents an ECG. The blue line is the output from the deep neural network answering the question, is this the same human being? And the blue line across the top goes across thousands of ECGs at a value of 1, meaning 100% the deep neural network believes all these ECGs are from the same person. Now, a human cardiologist probably couldn't tell if I showed you ECGs that were very rate different, that this was the same person. But a deep neural network trained on 300,000 parameters was able, with high degree of accuracy, to say this is the same person. Why is this interesting? Well, let me show you. We applied that same deep neural network to 60 users where we had lots of data. And for many of these users, as you can see here, the results were just like I showed you. Almost 100% they're the same. But for some of these users, let me zoom in. For that user, for example, we got a very interesting result. The blue line is the output of the deep neural network, and you can see it's bimodal. It cannot say this is the same person. It's right in the middle. Anybody want to guess what's going on there? Why would the deep neural network say it can't figure this out and it's 50-50? Sharing. Mike. Of course Mike would know that. It's husband and wife sharing the device. And it teased it right out. Anybody want to guess what's going on? Here. 10 times the number of ECGs taken, a stop, and then a pickup again with 10 times the number of ECGs taken. Anybody want to guess? Mike? Clinical trial. A doctor was using this as a clinical trial, and they were all different patients, and so the deep neural network could not figure it out. So those are fun examples, but let me show you ones that are much more relevant. Here's a few I'm going to go into. Let's dig into 2 examples. Let's call this person Mark. You can see the most important thing to note is that the ECG, or that the top line, the deep neural network thought it was the same person. And then in October of 2014, on a Tuesday night, the deep neural network flipped and said, this no longer looks like Bob. Now, for a moment, before the deep neural network said it doesn't look like Bob, go look at when it did say it was Bob. Look at the different types of ECGs that it still recognized as Bob. Very different looking ECGs, but it knew that it was Bob. But one Tuesday night, it flipped and said it's not Bob anymore. What happened that Tuesday night? He developed right bundle branch block. Now, some cardiologists tell me, I don't care about right bundle branch block, especially if it's not symptomatic. I don't want to be bothered with it. But you might be very concerned if it was left bundle branch block. But that's not the point. The point is, when would this have been caught? At the next ECG? Is that when you want to have your dad's heart notified, or would you like to know the night it happens? We can't afford to have people come in and do ECGs every day. We can't afford the time to have doctors look at this. But a deep neural network that knows your heart is changing, that you're not your normal anymore. That's incredible. By the way, we shipped this in March. We're approaching 1 million ECGs a month. So our data set is nuts. There's hardly any trial that has this level of data. And we're training our deep neural networks as this come in. Let me give you another example that some of you may find more interesting. It looks like there's lots of noise, lots of dots in here, but really you can see that the deep neural network at the top identified the user as the same. This user had AFib in all cases, and then towards the beginning of 2016, in about the end of January, it flipped and said, this doesn't look like, let's call this person Lucy. It doesn't look like Lucy anymore. A traditional technician in your office would call all 3 of those ECGs what? They're all AFib. Lucy's always an AFib. But the deep neural network noticed that her AFib itself was changing. For those of you that can see, that last AFib has a very different T wave. So, how interesting is it that you can be notified that this person's normal, which was AFib, was in fact no longer looking like this person? So in our product, if you have our product, you see these 3 screens. The first screen will, when you get our product, will ask you over and over again, is this you, is this you, is this you, about 20 times until we build that heart model. Kind of like when you get your iPhone and you teach it one touch, we do the same thing on your ECG. Once we build that heart model, we say your heart model is complete, and that goes away. You never see these screens again until it's Thanksgiving and your uncle's over, and you go, hey, uncle, try this out. And then it pops up and says, this doesn't look like you, and you're right. I gave it to someone as a guest, and you mark it. But if it is you, we'll tell you, and try not to scare you. We'll say, hey, lots of factors could cause this to not look like you, so we don't freak the patient out. But in Cardia Pro, which only the doctor can see, look what we do. We alert the doctor. We said, this ECG does not match this patient's identity model, but they confirmed they recorded it. Compare. And now the doctor can click and say, aha, right bundle branch block. Or, hey, your AFib is changing. Maybe it's the medication we put you on. That's extraordinary. New tools. Some people tell me, I worry about AI. Is it going to replace my job? And I think that's kind of a crazy question. Which one of us would go out on a dark night, on a path, and not take a flashlight? Of course we would take a flashlight. And then when we came back into our well-lit house, which one of us would be worried and say, I'm really worried about this flashlight. I wonder one day if it's going to replace human eyes. Of course we wouldn't. It's a tool. And so we think things like this will build powerful new tools for EPs and cardiologists. We think tools like this will allow doctors to see further than they've ever been able to see before. We dream and hope that one day this will become so powerful that it'll be a liability for you not to use this. Say, hey, doc, how come you didn't know my heart was changing? And so we aim to build great stuff like this. By the way, our first national television commercial launches on Monday. And so hopefully your patients, you'll hear more from them, and they'll ask you about this, and you can talk to them. Sorry, that was my last plug for Cardia. Here's for those of you that are data people, you'll find this very interesting. We took the output of the deep neural network and we encoded it into a 3D space. You can take any kind of data and encode it into whatever dimensionality you want. In this case, we said, just help us as humans visualize what the deep neural network sees in 3D. And what you're looking at here is each color represents a person, each dot represents an ECG. They're streaking because these ECGs were done during dialysis sessions. And so that's why they're streaking. But ignore the streaking. What pops out immediately? What can the deep neural network clearly see? Identity. We didn't program in identity. It popped out of the deep neural network. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Let me give you another example. First, let me tell you the story. Dr. Friedman and his team at Mayo Clinic published a paper in February of last year. Was it last year? Yeah, it was last year. February of last year in the American Heart Association. Some of you may have read it. It was an amazing paper. Mayo Clinic claimed in this paper that they could pick out potassium levels by looking at the depolarization of the T wave. And they had an algorithm that could be close to a blood test. Why is this significant? Well, how do you check for hyperkalemia today? You do a blood test. And if you don't have access to a blood test and you get very hyperkalemic, what happens? You get arrhythmias, people die. Particularly dialysis patients who get their dialysis Monday, Wednesday, Friday. They're most susceptible on Sunday. They get hyperkalemic, they're asymptomatic, and very bad outcomes happen. So the promise of simply having an ECG you could do at home that could predict potassium levels is extraordinary. And what you're looking at the top is a black line, which is 4 blood draws and the actual potassium level extrapolated through that blood draw. The blue line is the algorithm developed at Mayo. And you can see it's pretty accurate, but there's one problem with it. What's the problem with the blue line? High variance. It jumps around a lot. In one case, it's 5.5, which you would probably call hyperkalemic, and then it drops really low. You might say it's hypokalemia. And so it's noisy and high variance. But you can see that EKG at the bottom has a beautiful T wave. Look at that T wave. It's a perfect T wave. So they partnered with us. They are investors in AliveCor, and we took over the development of that algorithm. And we applied AI technology for the first time. We applied deep neural network, unsupervised learning against our 15 million ECG data set. This is the new and improved algorithm. It's going to overlay in red. And those of you in the back might not be able to see it. But it is very little variance, and it's extraordinary. Now, there's a slight problem. The algorithm developed at Mayo was developed by doctors. Doctors developed the algorithm based on knowledge of physicians. And what are all physicians taught about hyperkalemia? What do you look for? T wave changes. Our team are Google, Apple, deep neural network people. We're not doctors. We have doctors. Our founder's a doctor, but I'm talking about this particular algorithm team. And they didn't know about this. So they used unsupervised learning where the deep neural network did not apply human knowledge. It figured out from the ECG everything that was affecting potassium. So look at this example. Look at the ECG. There is no T wave. It's a terrible T wave, right? It's a lead one where the T wave didn't come through. Look at the blue line now. This is the Mayo algorithm. It completely fails, right? Our new algorithm developed in conjunction with Mayo, the one I just showed you, look at that. It's perfect in predicting potassium. Why? Because it's looking at hundreds of thousands of parameters that we don't even fully understand that correlate to the potassium level. It's absolutely amazing. So for those of you that are wondering about this work, we're in clinical trials at multiple places. It's not FDA approved yet. We're working to get FDA approval, but we're working to build the clinical evidence of its accuracy, and the results already are outstanding. Let me give you one final example. Patches and implantables. Is there another way? You may have seen this at HRS just a few weeks ago. It was University of Oklahoma, a poster they put up. The net of this poster was that the Apple Watch with an ECG band, this is an Apple Watch with a special band with a single lead ECG, proved to be as accurate as the gold standard. They compared it against a 12-lead ECG. And the paper basically said it's absolutely the same. So that was great. So if you can do a single lead ECG from this device, the question is, what else could you do? What happens? Actually, let me back up and set up the problem. One nit that people could accurately complain about AliveCor is that what is it that AliveCor cannot do with our device? You're all doctors. There's some cases where you would not use the AliveCor device, and you'd probably use a patch, a link. What's that? Asymptomatic. That's exactly right. Asymptomatic. If it's asymptomatic, the user doesn't even know to hold the device. So how are you going to catch it? Silent AF. It doesn't give you AF burden. What if you could get AF burden? How could you do that? Well, in this particular example, what we've developed is something that turns the PPG sensor on continuously, shuts off everything else, and gets 20 hours of PPG continuous going. Now, some of you who know this are going to say, well, Vic, what's wrong? Why can't PPG be useful for diagnosing AFib and other arrhythmias? Because it's not accurate enough. No, I doubt the FDA is ever going to let you go through with AFib just from PPG. But imagine if you combine the two. Imagine if you use the PPG sensor to continuously guard your heart and then alert the user, hey, John, take an ECG. What kind of problems would you have? Well, you'd say, well, Vic, that's not going to work. Every time I walk up a flight of stairs, it's going to say my heart rate's up, and it's going to prompt me to do an ECG. So we filed for a patent several years ago and got it issued in February, heart rate activity discordance. We use a combination of AI and simple algorithms that literally recognize you're walking up a flight of stairs, you're giving a speech, you're moving around, your heart rate's up a little bit. This is totally normal. Or you go up the same flight of stairs to work every Monday. We know this. But when we pick up an anomaly, either because we don't sense activity or because it doesn't match your pattern, we fire off a message and say, do an ECG. This week, we caught an AFib episode that lasted under 60 seconds. It's incredible, and we're in clinical trials. But you can imagine that if this gets through and works, then the patient has a choice. Do you go for a patch, an expensive operation, and a $24,000 implantable, or do you give the patient 2 Apple Watches and say, go home, wear these for the rest of your life? That's what AI could do. AI can help a low-fidelity signal become high fidelity in a totally new way. So, I hint here that maybe one day if you can do AF burden from a watch, what that could mean for cardiology. So, briefly, just to summarize, I've shown you how artificial intelligence can come to understand what your normal is and how revolutionary that could be in the field of cardiology. We showed you how artificial intelligence can see the invisible. No human doctor can look at a T wave and tell you your potassium level is 5.2. AI might be able to do that. And finally, AI that might one day guard your dad's heart continuously and look for changes that no one else could see. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much.